Okay, and to make it basically like little influenced by people. Little influenced by people. Okay. What happened here? At several places along the sea coast, at several places along the sea coast. Okay, erosion happening, erosion, and that erosion basically exposed erosions, exposed what is known as the deposits of bituminous shell. Bituminous shell. Okay. Now, what happened here? Now, these carbon rich deposits, yeah, that's shell here. Okay, this is A here. Okay, these what you call these carbon rich deposits have spontaneous or spontaneously ignited and have been smoldering almost for centuries. For centuries. Okay. This is how it looks like, I guess. Did you see this one here? Okay. And basically, this shows have done quite of damage because large area, as a matter of fact, to the nearby forest and so on, and also producing quite a bit of what you call toxic fume and so on. So basically, this is a natural picture to you. Okay. As I mentioned to you, have been spontaneously ignited and have been smoldering for, as a matter of fact, for centuries. Now, what happened here? That, as a matter, this is just, for example, fumigating. Okay, fumigating the nearby. Fumigating the nearby tundra. Okay, with basically with sulfur dioxide. With sulfur dioxide, okay. And as you know, basically the SO2 also is quite toxic also, to mention this point. And the SO2, okay, is toxic to vegetation. okay, and cause also, because this is going to result causing a lot of acidification. And to mention this point here, okay, toxic to vegetation and causes, okay, intense acidification. Okay, of soil and water. Okay, and water. So basically, simple. This is to mention this point, of course, to mention that this natural pollution, okay, has severely damaged. Okay, has severely damaged as a terrestrial and aquatic habitat of the tundra. Terrestrial and aquatic habitat or habitats of the tundra. Okay. So basically, this is one example of this natural pollution. The other example I'm going to mention to you, basically what you call is the toxic bloom, which occur in some lakes, and also which is mainly due to some kind or species of the blue-green algae. To mention this point here, to mention also another case of natural pollution. Of natural pollution involves certain species okay, of marine phytoplanktons. You see that? Of marine phytoplanktons, okay? That basically, that occasionally, okay, I'm going to continue here. Second here. Okay. That occasionally, as a matter of fact, okay, become abundant. Occasionally become abundant, okay, become abundant, and as a matter of fact, and cause ecological damage. This is and cause ecological damage. Uh, and basically, sometimes this is known as toxic bloom in events. Okay. I'm going to continue here. I think you finish this one. Just forget about this part here. Okay, this one. In events, okay, called toxic blooms. Okay. These, of course, mostly I want to mention algae, but mostly is going to be depends algae, or sometimes mostly is basically blue-green algae, okay, or they're known as also cyanobacteria. To mention this point here, these algae, okay, of course, release, okay, bio uh, chemical or biochemicals that are poisonous or toxic. Sorry, or toxic to a broad range of animals, exposed, okay, to them through the food web. Okay, uh, I'm just mentioning that most of toxic bloom developed by blue green algae growth. Of course, the blue algae is sometimes known as cyanobacteria, and some of the species, for example, microcystis, okay, such as microcystis species, or even sometimes some other species, okay. Of course, when they develop growth like this, okay, as you can see this one here, okay, uh, and sometimes basically they cause as a poison death, sometimes especially if birds drinking or any other animal, it can cause some of them paralysis and so on, okay. This is also as part of kind of natural type of what you call pollution. So this is just to give you some example here. Now we're going to talk about a little bit more, maybe, okay, about the anthropogenic pollution. Okay. As already familiar, basically in these days, going to mention about that a lot of pollution associated with the human activity. To mention a few points and just to give you some example. Now, of course, in modern world, okay, an enormous amount of pollution, okay, is associated, of course, as you know, with the human activities. Okay. And of course, to mention, of course, this has caused, of course, important damage. Okay, has caused important damage, okay, to ecosystems. And sometimes okay, to human health even. Okay. And I'll give you some example of these just under this here, that the most common anthropogenic, most common, okay, or anthropogenic pollution um, is associated more or less, okay, with these sort of activities. Okay. One of these, for example, intimation of these sort, it could be accidental or deliberate. To make this one, for example, accidental or deliberate. Okay, emission. We call it emission of chemicals into the environment. Okay, into the environment, such as, for example, sulfur dioxide, metals, pesticide, petroleum, etc. Okay, such as sulfur dioxide, metals, pesticides, and petroleum. So this is one example. The other one could basically, they release substances and these could react in the atmosphere. And it results what is known as a secondary pollution. To talk about this one, releases okay, releases of substances okay, of substances that react in the environment okay, that react in the environment to synthesize chemicals. okay, to synthesize chemicals, okay, of greater toxicity. Okay, so basically what happened, these, we call it in this case as a secondary pollution, okay, known as secondary pollution. Okay, I'm going to put it down here to continue another page here. Just give me a second here to give you an example about it. Okay, so basically they reach compound, and these compounds react in the atmosphere or sometime in the stratosphere and so on, and resulted in a more toxic type of compound we call secondary pollution. For example, to make this point, as for example, okay, let's just see what. Okay, now, as for example, okay, as occur when ozone when ozone is synthesized by a photochemical, and to finish it here, of photochemical reaction in the atmosphere. Okay. Now, we're going to discuss that basically in detail later on about how the reaction occur in the atmosphere. Now, to mention also to mention, for example, emissions of chemicals. Other point to mention: emissions of chemicals that degrade that degrade the stratospheric ozone, that degrade stratospheric ozone, such as, for example, the compound, such as this compound known as chlorofluorocarbon. And they would complete here called chlorofluorocarbon. Or carbons. Okay. Other example type was known as release of waste industrial heat. Release of waste industrial heat. For example, as when a power plant Okay, when a power plant discharge hot water into a river or lake. When a water plant, okay, discharge, okay, hot water, okay, into a river or lake. Okay. The other time, of course, by releasing what you call like nutrient laden sewage, which basically, if it goes to the river and others, of course, going to cause that basically what is known as eutrophication, and that basically in the end will kill the other living organism in that particular lake or river and so on. Now, this is known as basically discharge, okay, of a nutrient laden sewage. Okay, or fertilizer. Okay, into water bodies. And of course, as you know, this is will cause known as eutrophication. Eutrophication, when you, of course, when you produce a lot of nutrient, it's going to result in the growth, as we can see here, either of algae or blue-green algae, and basically with a huge, this organism is going to deprive the water body out of oxygen, anything, and gradually, of course, will kill all other organisms if it stayed for a long time. Now, also to mention, the other example or other categories, for example, here, that emission of greenhouse gases that threaten global climate. Okay, we'll talk about this. Okay. As you can see here, some, for example, either have like this one here, chemical pollution, or this one, you can see this one here, for example, or in case, for example, like this one, which is, you call it thermal pollution. This could be thermal and mixed also with chemical pollution, or the other things here. Okay, all that as a matter of fact. Okay, see now what I have example here. Okay, well, this one here. Yeah, we're going to mention about all the other things. Okay, here. Now, once we finish this one, then we'll talk about other title here. Okay, we're going to talk about basically what we call disturbance. Okay. Okay, under this title here. Now, disturbance, no matter what you call it, if you want to define it, basically, it is a disturbance. Okay, is an episodic, okay, but intense, okay, but intense influence that causes called severe biological and ecological damage. And ecological damage. Now, to mention sometime event of disturbance, okay, events of disturbance, are followed sometimes, okay, by, okay, but sometimes, okay, called okay, tracted, okay, period of ecological recovery. Through the process which is known as succession, and sometimes, of course, we call it as a secondary succession, okay, through the process or processes, okay, known as succession, or also we call it, or sometimes secondary succession. Okay. This is, for example, as it happened in Sudbury, as a matter of fact, when, of course, when the mining and other, and destroy quite a bit of the, what you call, of the pine forest, original forest in most of the Sudbury area. And it's quite a bit, this is a process, of course, started from, as a matter of fact, from the even the late of 19th century and so on, okay? And as you can see here, just give you an example that how it's to the impact of that, okay? That you find all the done like this one here, okay? All this, the white cedar remains all being damaged here, or this one here, the white pine stumps, as you can see, all area. And what happened here, of course, later on, I'll give you example. Succession in general, of course, when that plant the continue growing according until end, of course, the climax type of vegetation, which reach what they call with the environment, this we call the climax vegetation, or plant species, like in this case was pine or otherwise cedar and so on. But when that damage occur, and as you know, basically a lot of rehabilitation occur and so on, and now basically what happened, they find, for example, still some pine is coming out of them, but mostly by birch. So now this birch is becoming a secondary succession. Do you follow what I'm saying here? Sometimes not easily you can produce back again what used to be the real or original climax of the vegetation, and thus we call it a secondary succession sometime occur. Okay, so basically, as I mentioned to you here, that what is a period, of course, that if there is a pollution damage, of course, if later on that try to to do a remediation for it or to stop it, then of course a succession will take place. Okay, now then to continue after this, of course, there are two to mention. There are two broad types of disturbances. There are, okay, two broad, sorry, there are two broad types of disturbances. Okay. Now, one is known as called community replacing disturbance. One is known as a community replacing disturbance. The other one is known as micro disturbances. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about each one a little bit of here. Now, in case of the first one, which is the community replacing disturbance. Okay, that are relatively extensive. This basically are. Are you following this here? Are relatively, okay, extensive in scale. Okay, extensive in scale, and also and result, and result, as a matter of fact, we call in a catastrophic destruction of the original community. Okay, and result, okay, in a catastrophic result in a catastrophic, okay, destruction of the original community. Destruction of the original community. Okay. And sometimes, of course, it could occur naturally when you have, for example, fire, or sometimes earthquakes, or sometimes windstorm, and so on. So basically, that was, let me mention some example here. Okay, down here. Okay, now to mention that, for example, natural examples of this, what you call community replacing disturbance. Just give me a second here. Natural example, okay, or examples include think you see this one, I put it down here. Include, as a matter of fact, is wildfires. Okay, wildfires. Okay, wind storms. Okay, avalanches. Okay, avalanches, and also, and I mentioned, and glaciation. Okay. Now, this example of natural, we're going to a case of anthropogenic, for example, while, going to mention here, while, for example, anthropogenic. Okay. Ones, of course, in case we mean, of course, anthropogenic, what you call community replacing disturbance, while anthropogenic ones, as a matter of fact, include, okay, for example, clear cutting, okay, or for example, and plowing, whole areas of matter. Now, to mention, of course, these sort of disturbances may be followed also may be followed, okay, by a successional recovery. Successional recovery that eventually as a matter of fact, regenerate a community okay, similar to what was destroyed. Okay. But of course, not all the time. Like, for example, what happened, the one I showed you, especially in Sudbury, in some area, when it happened, like most of the vegetation, resulted in the end, of course, when the rain and the snow and other make erosion of the soil. And that's why, of course, now the process, maybe another type of vegetation come, or the, so this also sometimes create what you call a compound problem, if not being dealt, okay, sometimes not easy. Now, this is just an example to give you about what you call now as a community replacing disturbances. Now, what you call as a micro disturbances, and basically when you go, for example, and for some reason how they will keep the community intact, but they use one species, okay, just which is of interest, okay, and they leave everything else. Of course, in this case, it's more easier that community or habitat to recover, and to make this one under micro disturbances. Micro disturbances or micro disturbance. Okay, disturbances involves, okay, local we call local disruption. Okay. We call local disruption that affects or affect, okay, small areas, okay, within another, within small area within, okay, another, okay. Otherwise, because what happened in this case, the really most of the community remain intact. Otherwise, okay, the community in general remain intact. Okay. To give you an example of this one, okay, for example, an anthropogenic disturbance or micro disturbance in this case. Okay, micro disturbance include, okay, the selection, or we call it selective harvesting, include the selective harvesting, okay, of individual okay, in this case, of course, large trees or animals. Or animal. Okay. As I mentioned, but of course, the other part of the community is going to stay, as a matter of fact, in this case, what you call intact, as I would mention to you. Okay. Otherwise, while leaving, okay, the community otherwise intact. Okay. Now, in this case, of course, what happened here, the ecological process to repair this is going to be quite quick, as a matter of fact. It doesn't take all that long to mention this point here. Now, ecological changes, in this case, okay, in this case, ecological changes, okay, are relatively rapid. Okay, are relatively rapid within the habitat. Within the habitat, okay? So basically to mention this case here now, for example, patch or patches, patch or in this case patches, okay, affected, say by a recent micro disturbance okay, by a recent micro disturbance, okay, which we call at the stand level. Here, of course, when we talk about the stand level, that means if you are going and select an area, site, this is not a stand level. About in this case, of course, the community itself is stable. Stand level, what happened here? The community itself, as a matter of fact, remains stable. The community, okay, is stable. All right. We're going to talk about also natural disturbance, okay, in this case here. Okay. Sometimes, okay, mention here, mention that sometimes natural disturbance okay, like for example, like wildfires, okay, can affect, okay, or affect all ecosystems, can affect all ecosystems. Okay. For example, mention that fire, okay, is a common, for example, is a common, okay, in the boreal forest, and also and we call it and in a drought prone ecosystem, prone ecosystems, such as the prairie. The prairies, okay, the prairies and savanna. Okay, very good. For example, in this case, for example, in Canada, always, not always, on average, about 3 million hectares, more or less, is burned per what you call per year. To mention this point here, okay, on average, on average, 3 million hectares or hectares, okay, of forest burn each year in Canada. Okay. And also to mention, of course, another example, which is already we mentioned before also, for example, but most of the time like hurricanes, tornadoes, and a flood, but this damage always is later on followed by a recovery period. And to mention this point here, hurricanes, okay, tornadoes, flooding, okay, all that, and glaciation. Glaciation over, okay, and of course, glaciation, as a matter of fact, over what you call a geological period, over a geological period. Okay. Usually, in the terminology we have of recovery, sometimes we have ecological period and geological period. Usually, ecological period, which take the normal, that means always a period would take some time in the average of hundreds of years. Okay. Of course, geologicals becomes thousands or more of years. Okay, that's what they said, ecological or geological period. Okay, just give me a second here. Then we'll continue after that. Okay, just give me a second here. Just in case we didn't finish that one, I'm not sure yet. Okay. As I mentioned, geological period, and also this one to continue after that. Also, this one basically, okay, can cause what you call extensive ecological damage. Extensive ecological damage, okay, and as I mentioned, and also is followed by a successional recovery. Okay. If you finish with this one, I'm going to take it away now. This one here, let's look at this one. Okay. For example, also to mention here, for example, volcanic eruptions. Okay. And earthquakes. Okay. Volcanic eruption, of course, can generate okay, a devastating can generate okay, devastating, we call it oceanic waves or tsunami. Tsunami. Or tsunamis. Okay. That example, I think I mentioned to you, for example, an 18 example to mention to you here, example, in 1883, okay, we call that was huge. The cataclysmic, the kata, okay, called the cataclysmic, okay, eruption, which is occur, as I mentioned to you, basically in this one of the Indonesian island in Karakuto, okay, eruption, okay, of called Karakuto, okay, which is basically Karakuto, this one here, which is occur basically in Indonesia, or Indonesia, okay, initiated basically, this eruption initiated 30-meter, okay, sea waves, okay, that killed at the time, okay, that killed about 36,000, okay, people, okay. Also to mention that more than, okay, more than 225,000 people were killed, okay, by this tsunami, also in the Indian Ocean. Or so, Indiana Ocean. Okay. Just an example. And there are more other examples, but just an example we can, okay. Sometimes they try to visualize the catastrophic amount of these events, which is they show something like that here. Okay, just this one here, or shows this is the impact of these tsunamis, something like that. Okay. Now, of course, basically in this case, of course, the ecologists try to understand and how they are to help design and management. To make this point here now, ecologists or ecologists, okay, they try to understand, okay, the effects Okay, the effects of natural disturbance or disturbance, like disturbance, and they may use this knowledge and they may use, of course, this knowledge as a matter of fact here to help design management, to help design management management systems. Okay, that allow okay resources to be harvested, allow resources, just give me a second here, to be harvested, that means to be used or extracted, okay, or otherwise okay, at the same time is used, okay, while controlling the ecological damage. Okay. Now, basically, for example, we call, for example, to understand the characteristic of gap phase disturbance in all the growth forests. I'm going to explain to you this one here. Okay, now, yeah, just left a couple of minutes here. For example, okay, understanding what we call the characteristic of gap phase, okay, disturbance in an old growth forest. Okay, can aid or help. I will explain it, give me a second. Can aid or help, okay, in the design of selective harvesting, the one we talk about, of a selective harvesting, okay, system that emulate or emulates the natural disturbance regime. The natural disturbance regime. Did you follow that? Now, when you talk about this gap phase disturbance, the natural gap. Now, usually, for example, when you go to a forest, for example, like the tropical forest, okay? Now, what happened, of course, as you know, in the tropical forest, because the vegetation is very dense, so what you call, the competition for light is very severe. And that's why we have a lot of species. It could be epiphyte that they use other plants just to go on top of them to reach to the light, or there is a quite number of liane species. Liane species, that means what you call, they have their stem is basically looping around other plants, okay, climbing other plants. So what happened here, say with, say if one tree or died of disease or anything, so what's going to happen, the light is going to penetrate, and then after that, of course, gradually different species going to come. So this studying that area, they call it, what you call known as gap phase disturbance. Okay, so basically that means they can use this kind of knowledge. For example, when they do selective harvesting, as I mentioned to you, like to pick only one species, either a plant or animal from a particular type of community, and what the impact will has on the community later on how to recover. So by this, basically, I will end up my lecture for at the moment, and I will talk to you later. Did you follow it okay today, please? Or do you have any question? Okay, then I think then our next lecture is going to be on a Friday. I will meet you there. Okay, and also at the same time, I will send you later on also the link or the Zoom link for the for our meeting later on. Okay, for the essays. Any more question, please? Or anything you want to? That's all. Everything's okay. All right. I'm going to end up now the Zoom link here. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.